Welcome to the Antioch University Santa Barbara Writing Center Understanding APA workshop. This part of the workshop is APA Style Part 1, Thesis Statements. This is part of a 5-video series with 3 parts about APA style and 2 parts about APA format. So today we're going to talk about what APA is and why to use it, what an APA style paper is, how to develop a thesis statement in APA style, and that includes the idea that a thesis statement is an answer to a research question. So we'll talk about what research questions are. We'll do a little practice developing thesis statements, and I'll also introduce the usefulness of hedged language, especially in your thesis statement. So APA stands for American Psychological Association. And APA is a system of in-text citations and references. That is the subject of the Understanding APA workshop. It's also a format for documenting sources. That format will be explored in the last 2 of the 5 videos, talking about the format for in-text citations, references, and the paper document as a whole. And APA is a style of writing. So in the APA style manual, it specifies how to support a thesis statement, cite sources that avoid plagiarism, and integrate quotes and other source material. So why use APA? Well, it's commonly used for research in psychology and other social sciences, of course, because it's from psychology, but it's also used in other fields like education, communication, and business. And using APA, or really any style like APA, MLA, or Chicago style, offers a discipline a standard consistent format within that discipline. And so it's kind of like offering a shortcut way of talking and writing and understanding what people are communicating within a discipline, and it becomes more efficient and clear way of communicating within a field once you get used to that standard format and style. So using APA, or again, MLA or Chicago style, allows readers to look up your sources and protects you from accidentally plagiarizing and gives you credibility as a writer. What is an APA style paper? Well, a professional APA paper might be describing an experiment or like original research. So it might be an experimental report or a manuscript, and it might have the following sections, including a title page, abstract, introduction, the methods of the experiment, the results of the experiment, and then a discussion about those results. But in general, for a class, if your professors ask you to write a student paper, like a research paper or essay in APA style, then this often just means that you should use APA formatting and citation guidelines. But the trick is that you have to ask your instructors to be sure of their expectations. So if they say, write this next paper in APA style, it would be definitely worth asking them, okay, so I have to use APA style. Does that mean I need to include a title page? And they might say, oh no, use APA style, but you don't need a title page. And you might ask them, so does that mean I need to include an abstract? And they might say, oh no, use APA style, but you don't need to include an abstract for this assignment. It will just depend on the assignment and on the instructor. But, sometimes they just mean use the citation and reference format. So most likely your paper, if it's an APA style paper, is going to be a research paper, like a thesis-driven research paper. And this will include an introduction, a thesis statement, topic sentences, which is like the first sentence of each paragraph that kind of previews the main idea of that paragraph, and then a conclusion. So what we're going to talk about now is the thesis statement and how to develop a thesis statement in APA style according to the APA 7th edition manual. So to develop a thesis statement, well, first, what is a thesis statement? Your thesis should express a clear, informed view on a debatable issue. So basically, a thesis statement is a specific claim that people can agree with or disagree with rather than something that is general knowledge. That means that if your thesis statement for now is kind of more like just a fact that people can look up and not really disagree with, it's just something that's true, then that's not really a good thesis statement. Instead, you want your thesis statement to be something that some informed people might disagree with. And, that way you're making a claim that some people might agree or disagree with, and you're using your supporting evidence and arguments throughout the rest of the paper to try to convince your audience of readers that they should agree with your claim, even if they started off disagreeing. Your thesis statement usually goes at the end of your first paragraph, and I always recommend that you start with a working thesis and modify it if necessary. So what does that mean? It just means it's impossible to sit down and write a thesis statement first thing when you're starting a paper. I mean, you can write one first thing, but you might end up having to change it later. So a good way to approach it might be to start doing some research and thinking about the topic, write kind of a placeholder template thesis statement or working thesis statement, and be prepared to go back and tweak it a little and change it a little later after you've done more research, writing, thinking about your topic, because sometimes that thesis statement actually comes later on in the writing process as a little bit of an aha moment when you realize, oh, now I figured out my thesis statement. Now that I'm nearly halfway done or whatever, writing my paper. One other comment about putting it at the end of the first paragraph, that's generally good for shorter papers. If you have a much longer paper, like a thesis or a dissertation, then your main claim will go maybe farther in after a longer intro. Okay, so let's go back to that idea of how to develop a thesis statement. And another thing you want to be keeping in mind, you're making a claim for your thesis statement, and also your thesis statement is an answer to your research question. So I'm going to back up and talk now about what is a research question. So this could be something that your instructor assigns to you to answer in your essay. For example, this example is kind of like a high school essay example, like a high school prompt, where your teacher in high school would say, write an essay that answers the following question, right? And then in this example, it says, should the United States invest more time, money, and effort in space exploration? Why or why not? So you're going to make a claim about that, either yes or no, and that claim will be your thesis statement. That's an answer to that research question. Another type of research question could be something that you come up with yourself. So it could be something that you're curious about and you want to research on your own. Usually this happens for a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, where this is a question that you want to ask to all the data that's out there in the world. So here's an example of someone's PhD dissertation research question. And just like with the thesis statement, this is not something that they came up with right away at the beginning of their project. They needed to do a lot of research and thinking already to see like what other research is out there and what's kind of missing and not out there before they came up with this research question that they want to answer in their dissertation. You might include the research question in your paper or not. Like in this high school prompt example, you don't need to rewrite the whole question. You could just start off your paper with the statement, the sentence, like the U.S. should invest more time, or the U.S. should not invest more time in space exploration. But in a dissertation, you probably do include the entire research question in your paper and say something like, this dissertation attempts to address the following 2 research questions. So let's do a little practice with developing a thesis statement based on a research question. I have 2 examples. The first one is here, and it's just a yes or no question. Are standardized tests an effective assessment tool for high school students? So if that's our research question and our thesis statement is an answer to that, then just take a moment and think about what kind of thesis statement you could possibly write as an answer to that. You can always pause the video if you want. And here's a possible thesis statement. It's just a working thesis or a template. It's not all the way filled in yet, but it is a good thesis statement because it's a claim. You can see here I'm claiming that standardized tests are not an effective assessment tool for high school students. And that's something that people might disagree with. So that's a good thesis statement. But I'm going to be providing some different types of evidence and arguments to support my claim. This is just my working thesis statement, so I still need to do some research and figure out how I'm going to fill that in as I'm working on my paper. Here's a later version of it after I did a little research and thinking, and I've now filled in the 3 reasons that I'm going to be presenting as my evidence and arguments about why standardized tests are not an effective assessment tool for high school students. So I'm in this thesis statement, I'm presenting my claim and I'm previewing the types of things I'm going to talk about in the paper to support that claim. And then this last example, it is getting a little long. You can always use 2 sentences for your thesis statement if you need to. But I added something in this blue text here to this one that's called hedged language or hedging or qualifying language. So here it says standardized tests may provide some useful data, but they're not an effective assessment tool, right? So this may provide some useful data, but is the type of hedging where it actually makes my claim a little softer, but I'm doing that on purpose to make my argument more convincing because my readers will see that I'm not just making a giant bold claim like standardized tests are total garbage that won't help convince anyone who disagrees with me. Instead, I'm acknowledging that there are multiple perspectives and multiple points of view on this issue, acknowledging that there may be some useful things about them and may provide some useful data, but ultimately still arguing my claim that they're not an effective assessment tool for this particular thing. So softening your claim with some hedged language can actually make your argument stronger and more convincing. Let's look at one more example and we can practice this, answering this research question. So here we have a why question instead of a yes or no one. Why are boys diagnosed with ADHD more often than girls? So here again, you might want to pause the video and try to come up with a possible thesis statement that is an answer to this research question and that is a claim that some people might disagree with. And I'll go ahead and put up a possible thesis statement here. So here again, I have a working thesis where I haven't filled in all the parts yet, but it says boys are diagnosed with ADHD more often than girls because of factors related to, and then I'm going to fill in kind of the reasons or the factors. And because I'm saying, it's because of these things, that is a claim that some people will disagree with. Some people will look at my claim and say, no, that's not true. It's because of these other reasons over here, not those factors that you're talking about. So it's a good thesis statement because it's a claim that people can agree or disagree with. Here I have started to, after doing some research, I started to fill in the things I'm going to talk about to support my claim. Personality differences, gender bias, and behavior disorders. I also have added in blue here some hedged language again. Boys may be diagnosed, and that does not mean they may be diagnosed more often. It really just means it may be because of these things, but it may be because of other reasons instead. So again, I'm softening my claim, acknowledging that I'm not saying it's only these 3 reasons, but there might be others out there, and that will help make it more convincing to my readers. And for this last example, I have this part in blue text where I say, but an overlooked cause is that, before I introduce this 3rd type of evidence or argument. ADHD often coexists with other behavior disorders that mask gender differences. When I say, but an overlooked cause is that, I'm really telling my readers that I'm going to be focusing most of my paper, I think, on that last part. And kind of previewing that it's the main most interesting, newest contribution of my paper. So in all the other examples we saw so far, like up here, these are really previewing a paper that's kind of 1/3 about personality differences, 1/3 about gender bias, 1/3 about behavior disorders. But in this last thesis statement example, I'm previewing a different paper structure where I will talk about these first 2 points, but maybe a lot of people already know about them or agree about them, and I'll talk about them more briefly. And then again, this is my main point or newer contribution, is this overlooked cause that I'm going to focus on. So I might focus more than 1/3 of my paper on that. In other words, you can do a lot of things with a thesis statement. Again, you could use 2 sentences for your thesis statement if you need to, but what you can do with a thesis statement is make your main claim that's an answer to your research question. You can hedge the claim to soften it, to make your argument stronger, and you can preview the structure of your paper, the content and structure of your paper. So thank you all for watching. This was part 1 of APA style thesis statements. Definitely check out our other videos where we talk about APA style reducing bias and integrating source material, and then our last 2 about APA format.